The idea, the assumption that we are to explain to children events that are unexplainable to adults makes it a tough situation. And perhaps one of the hardest things is that as human beings, when we are confronted by the most disturbing convergence between our worst fears as human beings and them happening in real life, we're often overwhelmed. And when we're overwhelmed, we look for ways of organizing our thinking and trying to explain to ourselves, almost as though we're trying to digest something that feels completely indigestible. The first thing that I would say in terms of thinking about adults dealing with children is perhaps one of the hardest things, which is being able to listen. Not assume that we know what children are thinking about what they're hearing, or even assume what might be most important to them. We may assume that as adults, because we're upset, that children are also going to be upset. It's often a very good idea, if it's part of the family context, to have discussions about, what have your friends been talking about in terms of what happened wherever the place is. This opens the door, and it can be an enormous relief of pressure for both kids, who might want to immediately, if you ask, are you afraid? The answer might be a healthy no. It doesn't mean they don't have thoughts and ideas and maybe worries. So by opening the door, by asking the most general kind of comments that are not directed at their sense of vulnerability, might be a way in to hear about their ideas and what's on their minds. Not assuming that we should know what to tell kids before we've found out what their questions are and what their ideas are. And to actually recognize that there are things in life that are upsetting. But there's a difference between being able to actually appreciate someone's emotional experience as opposed to trying to get rid of it. Where we get concerned is that when kids and adults are really troubled by something, they often can emerge in symptoms. What we often see is disruptions in sleeping and eating, being irritable or withdrawn, feeling generally fearful of the world, inability to enjoy things that were enjoyed prior to the traumatic experience, preoccupying thoughts and fantasies that interfere with concentration. There are ways of dealing with that at multiple levels, starting with being able to talk with the people you trust and love. And when that's not helpful, knowing when and to whom to talk to in order to find some alternatives to the symptoms. I want to give a really quick example of a younger child. This was actually in a call-in show after 9/11 in New York City. The mother of a 4-year-old daughter called in describing the fact that her 4-year-old was repeatedly building block towers and then flying a plane into the block towers. The girl didn't seem agitated as she was doing this. I asked about how she and her husband were doing since the attack. What she described is they're anxious all the time, they're talking about it all the time, and that they're constantly watching the news. I suggested, look, it's understandable that you and your husband are struggling, and it's important that the two of you are able to talk with each other. But the other piece is your little girl's world is the two of you. When she sees how anxious you are, that may be tough for her. And even more so when the television is on all the time. As adults, we have our own ways of dealing with the concerns that we have. And sometimes we need to be very careful to recognize that we have our own worries and the ways they're getting expressed to deal with, without assuming that our children are sharing the same.